Cormac McCarthy, for the last couple years of his life, was writing with cancer and finished The Passenger while undergoing chemo treatments. And today, I'm going to let you guys know how Cormac McCarthy wrote with cancer. And I'm not going to turn this into a hoorah, let's go everybody. If Cormac McCarthy can write a book with cancer and you are a healthy young male who doesn't write at all and watches YouTube videos all day, what the hell is wrong with you? I'm not going to go there, but instead we are going to be hearing McCarthy's official biographer, Laurence Gonzales, talk about his writing process when he had cancer and how he was able to finish The Passenger and get it across the finish line. And so, if you don't already know, Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to Cormac McCarthy here on YouTube. In the playlist down below, you will find 180 videos on Cormac McCarthy's books, his life, and his philosophy. This is the deepest deep dive ever done on an author in BookTube history. And this channel is not just about McCarthy. If you look at some of my other videos, I am also planning to make 100+ videos on 20+ other authors just in the next couple years. So I would love to have you guys on this journey with me, but enough from me. Let us now hear from Alexander Sarando from an article where he interviews McCarthy's official biographer, Laurence Gonzales. And we start, quote, "There had been a cancer diagnosis, then radiation. The side effects of the treatment were so severe," said McCarthy's official biographer, Laurence Gonzales, "they made it virtually impossible for Cormac to work. I don't feel good," McCarthy once told him, a colleague at the Santa Fe Institute, "and it's hard to write when you don't feel good." And we continue. "His movement and comfort hampered by age and the lasting effects of radiation, McCarthy resolved to finish The Passenger in Stella Maris, but his stamina wavered." And so there is more, but a quick note that in Cormac McCarthy's room, where he did a lot of his writing in his later years, and really across his entire life, I think the only books that McCarthy wrote from scratch, not in his bedroom, were The Road. He converted No Country for Old Men from a screenplay in the Santa Fe Institute library, but everything else was in his bedroom, in his bed most of the time at his house, whether that was in Tucson, Knoxville, or El Paso, or Santa Fe. But in his bedroom, on the wall, I mean, this is what happens when you have money, I guess. I would never dream of doing this in my rented house. McCarthy had written The Passenger as a form, I think, of motivation for him to finish, a form of affirmation. There we go, McCarthy, everybody. McCarthy using affirmations to accomplish his writing goals. But another kind of groundbreaking thing we've learned recently about McCarthy is that Stella Maris was a screenplay that was originally started in the 1970s. And so a lot of that was already completed, probably outside of maybe some of the scientific stuff. And so The Passenger, is what he was really working on those last couple years. And all of this actually kind of breaks some of the canon we have on McCarthy's biography, because I've said many times on this channel before, because this is what his publisher said, that in 2013, The Passenger was done and that he was finishing Stella Maris, which from what this biographer is saying is not true. So returning to the quotes, "Colleagues at the Institute might come to this house for a meal or try with varied success to rouse him for a walk. The support network typed his handwritten corrections, submitted passages to colleagues who might vet the science in the novel, the math, the history, created comfort around the bed where he worked, his typewriter perched on a strip of wood. With the help of this network, despite worries of dying and things left unresolved, despite constant sliding on a scale of discomfort and pain, despite even the dispiriting pandemic isolation, McCarthy finished his opus, capping a manuscript that first took shape half of his life ago. It fits and starts between the largest works of his career, a project whose inspiration came to him a decade before that, from the unwritten verse of a dive bar ballad his friend used to sing in Chicago." So all of this is obviously very sad. We don't want to see one of our boys, one of the literary Renaissance OGs, Cormac McCarthy, having a hard time. But there is a deeper message to all of this, because I've heard people all the time. I made a video, I think I did a live stream a long time ago, where I read unpopular opinions of Cormac McCarthy from like the Reddit or something. And one of the top rated comments is that all the Santa Fe Institute stuff is really cringe, because McCarthy went to the Santa Fe Institute and became basically a fanboy, which is very interesting because throughout his entire life, McCarthy was seemingly very independent. He kind of touted, and this was a part of his whole marketing scheme, that he didn't talk to any writers, even though he was sending letters to Edward Abbey and Guy Davenport and Larry McMurdy and other people. He was in correspondence and hung out with a ton of writers. He was just saying that to look cool. But he was at some level a very isolated individual who never took money from universities or did any workshops or did any speeches or anything like that. And what's funny about this video, last night I actually had a dream. I was at a theater and Cormac McCarthy the dream was he had faked his death and he was coming out and about to give a speech. So I was there and I was sitting there and people were giving speeches before Cormac came out because seemingly he wasn't going to speak for very long. So people were saying nice things about him. And then someone said, mentioned the channel Right Conscious and like what he's done for Cormac McCarthy. And I screamed, "Fuck Right Conscious." I don't know why I did that, just to troll, and everyone looked at me. I was like, oh, yep, there we go. But people kind of see that whole saga because he went there and he wrote the manifesto and he talked about how great it was is cringe. But I think it was the first time in McCarthy's life that he actually had a group of friends and individuals that was at his level. And that may sound bad, but McCarthy was a high IQ individual. His father graduated top of his class at the Yale School of Law. His mother was very smart. His brother was a lawyer. His sisters went to prestigious Northeastern universities. McCarthy obviously became a great writer and was a great writer from day one. And so he is kind of a different stock than the average everyday person or writer. And so I think when he got the MacArthur Fellowship in 1981 and got to meet Nobel Prize winning scientists and all these other really smart people, he was like, oh my God, finally people who are smarter than me and who don't look at me as some sort of icon. Because I'm sure with McCarthy's friends and his wives and all these people, like his first wife who was a writer, there was jealousy, there was kind of that weird intellectual gap that I'm sure a lot of you guys experience in your life right now. But with the people at the Santa Fe Institute, he was the outsider. He was the outcast. And if you guys want to join my Cormac McCarthy book club, we are about to start reading 5 separate Cormac McCarthy novels. Yes, everybody, we are about to start reading No Country for Old Men, Child of God, Stella Maris, The Sunset Limited, and The Road Together. You will also get access to my Cormac McCarthy course, which has already over 20 hours of content in it, daily office hours where you can talk about Cormac McCarthy with me, plus daily podcasts where I talk about a wide variety of topics that I cannot discuss over here on YouTube. So if you guys want to join and support this channel and dive deeper into Cormac McCarthy's works and talk about it personally with me and others, the link is down in the description below. The book club calls are at different times on different days, so you should be able to make one of the calls. And we are also doing 15 other books other than Cormac McCarthy, which makes us the most active book club online. But he put a lot of work into it, and that's something that's kind of come out over the past couple years, the past year since his death, is that he was very active, not just in the Institute, but he was on the board of trustees. Hey, maybe he did approve or was on the board that approved $25,000 from Jeffrey Epstein after his first arrest. But I never got a reply to my email about what happened at that meeting with the board of trustees. So maybe he wasn't involved. But he went to the weddings of all the people at the Institute. He helped edit their books. He talked about his writing. That's another myth that has been built by McCarthy and his marketing team. Yes, he has a marketing team that has put hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into marketing McCarthy's image to make you think that he is a reclusive, tough guy cowboy. But with people that were his friends or weren't randos, he was fine talking about his books. I've been releasing segments of McCarthy's unreleased interview that was lucky enough to get access to. And in there, he talks about the Orchard Keeper and Suttree and all these random things. And he never says, I don't talk about it. I think he just made that a rule for random people because someone would run up to him and be like, Cormac McCarthy, what happened in Blood Meridian, bro? And he just didn't want to talk about that. But I've heard accounts from people who've met Cormac McCarthy. And if you walked up to Cormac McCarthy at a diner and you said, I love your books, but what do you think about rattlesnakes? He would sit and talk to you for 30 minutes. He would act like you were his best friend because he only wrote because he was good at it and because he didn't see anyone else writing the types of books that he was writing. So McCarthy became invested in the Institute, maybe even to a fault, because of, maybe some of their blindness to the Epstein stuff, his friendship with Lawrence Krauss, which, guys, I'm not even going to judge on that. It's whatever, if I have been friends with someone for decades and the Me Too movement got them, I would still support them. So, but I've heard people say also that this was all a waste of time. What if McCarthy never moved to Santa Fe? Because he only moved to Santa Fe for the Institute. What if he stayed in El Paso where he felt most creative, where he finished Suttree, Blood Meridian, did a lot of The Passenger, did the whole Border trilogy? What if he stayed there and spent more time writing? How many more books would we have? I would assume we would have a couple more. But what's interesting is that, kind of serendipity led to him being in Santa Fe and actually visiting El Paso with his son and being inspired to write The Road. Serendipity gave him an opportunity, even after he got cancer, something that probably would have happened if he was in El Paso or in Santa Fe, to be able to have a community around him who wasn't just going to help him, give him food or, be a nurse or whatever, but do what we saw here. And this is it makes me emotional to talk about, but this is what it's really about, you guys. This is what all of us should be striving for. A lot of us writers out there are lone wolves. We don't really have a community around us. We don't maybe even understand the idea of putting time into something that doesn't seem logical, editing random papers and books on physics, or becoming friends and spending hours chatting at lunch with a bunch of people who are scientists and not even writers who aren't going to help your career. All of that came in full circle, though, for McCarthy, because at the lowest point of his life, when he was in pain, when he had no stamina, when he couldn't even leave his room and it was COVID, people were coming over and having meals with him, talking to him, taking him on walks. And shout out Laurence Krauss, because you know how much shit Laurence Krauss got for that interview he did with Cormac McCarthy? But that was only 6 months before his death, after all of this cancer diagnosis stuff, and apparently after hanging out for 6 hours and drinking margaritas and eating chimichangas at a Mexican restaurant. And so obviously McCarthy wasn't going to be that talkative after all of that. So I will even apologize to Laurence Krauss for kind of saying, oh, he interrupted too much, because as someone who's now interviewed other people, and when some people just don't respond, it's really hard, and you have to just start interrupting them to try to get some action going. But I mean, things were so bad that he was typing in bed with the typewriter on a piece of wood. They vetted, a lot of the people. When The Passenger came out, there were so many people who just the first thing they did was critique all the science and the math and the history of the novel. And there were so many Reddit posts and people like, oh my God, I figured out. But, they were just random, I'll just say it, random idiots who got a master's degree and probably work in some lab. And, I don't know too much. Maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid right now. But I assume that if people at the Santa Fe Institute, who are some of the better scientists or mathematicians or whatever in the world, vetted it and gave it an okay, that most of it is probably correct. And also, it's a fiction novel, so not everything needs to be perfect. And I mean, the saddest part of this is the line that despite worries about dying and things left unresolved. I mean, that's so sad that you're dying and like there's so many unresolved things. He had a son. I mean, McCarthy's son is barely, I think, in his early 20s right now. So back a couple years ago when all this was going on, he had a son in high school. I mean, he has his whole estate and his affairs and all these unfinished books that we were already talking about. That's an immense amount of pressure. Plus this book. Plus just the worry of dying. Like, you don't want that to happen. Like, there are some people out there who don't have much to live for anymore, but having a young adult son, having a group of people who love you, having millions of people across the world who love you, and having lived a very full life without technology, without these things, watching life slip away, even to the best of us, even to the people like me or others who act like death isn't some big deal and like yada, yada, yada. When we're probably confronted with it, the only thing that we're going to want is, more life. And so shout out to Cormac McCarthy for pushing through. I mean, pushing through in the pandemic and isolation. Like, it's so sad to think of all the old people who were physically and psychologically affected by the lockdowns, who weren't able to go outside. David Lynch, of all people, I heard, won't leave his house or film another movie again because he's still scared that he might get COVID and die because he has emphysema. So I hope Cormac, in some of those moments, like in The Passenger, there are so many teenage boy jokes. There's so many random funny moments that I remember when it came out, people were like, oh my God, I didn't know McCarthy. And a lot of them were actually packed at the front of the novel. And that combined with, just kind of the difficulty of the start of the novel and how it was kind of, people thought it was boring. People who've never read Cormac McCarthy before were shocked. But I'm sure him on his deathbed, literally writing that and revising that and looking at that and knowing about what the modern world was and how people were going to react to probably jokes that were written in the 1960s or 70s. I'm sure he got a couple good laughs out of that. And so I personally think The Passenger is a masterpiece. I think that people who don't like it probably didn't finish it or didn't really tap into what was actually happening. That the writing, especially after page 150 for the last 250 pages, is better than Suttree and Blood Meridian because he wrote it during that time. It was literally the peak of his writing. And just because some things don't become resolved, I'm not going to spoil anything. Just because there are unresolved things doesn't mean that it's a bad novel. That actually means that he took an artistic risk and knew that there was going to be people who would sit and complain about it. So thank you, Cormac McCarthy, for doing this. Thank you for a beautiful legacy and a beautiful life. Thank you guys for supporting this channel, buying Cormac McCarthy's books, talking about it to other people, sharing his works out to the world, because Cormac McCarthy is a perfect example for the literary renaissance of a person who wrote books that can transform other people's lives. And that's what our goal here now is on Earth, because books can change the world, but it's up to you and I to do it. Cormac is dead. So let's go, and I will see you guys very soon.